Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be with you at this ASPI lunch. I have to say these events are approached with a little bit of trepidation on the part of speakers, and I guess a key performance indicator is how few articles are in the media the following day. And Ross, I can assure you I've done a word search. New Zealand doesn't appear anywhere in this one. So that was a tip from Chief of Air Force to me when I was actually crafting this. But despite that trepidation, I'm very keen to talk about Capability Development Group and I guess more fully how we do capability development in the department. What's been clear to me in the last couple of weeks is when I've gone through the Senate inquiry into procurement procedures in defence capital projects, when I look at the papers that have been submitted into that inquiry, what was clear was that the internal workings of defence capability development processes wasn't particularly clear to people. And I guess in some respects we sort of thought, well, you know, does it really matter? Well, the thing I did learn appearing before that committee was, in fact, it does matter, and it would benefit everyone if there was a much greater understanding about how we do capability development. I guess turning to ASPI, when ASPI was set up in 2000, I know a number of people in defence thought, why would Defence actually fund ASPI, and then knowing full well that ASPI will be quite critical of what Defence does and all that sort of thing. So I know there was some almost bemusement by some, but I think what we've seen in that time is actually that ASPI has made a tremendous contribution to what debate there has occurred in both in terms of public arena and I guess in the more sort of confines of the defence industry arena. And in particular, some of the original research and so on is without a parallel in that sort of broader community, but noting there's other players in the field. So I think that that notion of actually having an organisation like ASPI, I think, has paid off, and I think that we're all to the benefit of it. Today, what I'd like to do is really cover off in four aspects of capability development. First is I just want to talk about the if you like, our view of the Defence Capability Development Scorecard. So you heard Mark's last time round, and really what I want to do is look at the scorecard really from the period of when the 2009 Defence Capability Plan was published, and then to last month. So that sort of period, how we actually fared. Second, I want to discuss what are the key activities that we're engaged in this period, post-budget, and lead up to the white paper. Third, I want to talk about the challenges we will have actually once the white paper is published mid next year. And finally, I just want to, for the heck of it, I want to actually talk about some of the myths I see out there about capability development and have a go at debunking some of them. So, first off to the scorecard. As was indicated, I am very much a glass half full sort of guy. So what I'd like to do is just talk about when you look at the DCP in 2009 when it was released, and then you look at how many projects were we supposed to actually get through till about May last month. The number is 59. So we would have expected 59 projects to be approved with a value of about 28 billion. How have we actually gone? Well, we've gone 44 approvals instead of 59. And the total value is actually about 13 billion. So, in looking at that difference, it's important to take into account that in that discrepancy, 12 billion of which is actually the Joint Strike Fighter. So, if you take that into account, I think actually it's not going too badly. And in fact, I think what you see in terms of a lot of the commentary is it tends to be very much on those numbers, how many approvals and all that sort of thing. What there isn't, and even in some of the ASPI writing, is what is the analysis? Why is that? Why are there less approvals? What were the reasons why some projects didn't actually proceed? And I really want to go into that in a bit more detail, because I think it's really important in terms of just actually understanding the process from a, if you like, a practitioner perspective. Because what I've seen in terms of some of the writing is it tends to be explained away by the fact that, oh well, there was just an unrealistic number to get through, and defence and in part industry just couldn't deliver it. I think what is true is in 2009 there was an unrealistic expectation about how quickly the department and industry could actually ramp up and get through the approvals, but actually start to deliver. And I think when you look back, there was that there were people at the time saying that's probably too high. What we've seen, particularly last year, is that both defence and industry were actually increasing that momentum, and that there was a significantly larger increase in terms of the actual absolute numbers of projects going through government. So I think that is a fair point. But I think that what underlines it also is there's actually specific issues to do with specific projects that we need to be aware of. I'll get to that in a moment, but one of the things that I'd be remiss of me to talk about is the fact that there's a recognition within Defence that we can still do a lot better in terms of the rate of approvals. Amongst other things, it shouldn't be so much hard work, and the document set could be slimmer, the process could be more streamlined, and so for that reason we've embarked on a number of reforms under the auspices of the Capability Development Improvement Program, which really looks at a bunch of micro reform but also some systemic reform about actually how we do business. And that really is taking into account some of the insights from the Mortimer Review, the Black Review, and also a lot of our people have who, if you like, live the dream on a daily basis, have got some really good ideas about how we actually improve matters. And the CDIP program gives us that, if you like, umbrella of how we can actually do those reforms. And so I've been really pleased in the last couple of months about tangible things that we are doing to actually improve that. What I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about some specific issues about the DCP, because the DCP is a plan. The word plan is in there for a reason, and so plans are subject to change. And I think what we've seen is it is a fairly dynamic plan, but it's also one that is very much for some good reasons. So I think there has been an appreciation by some that you've got the 2009 exam question, and then year on year, how you're going to deliver it. But when you look, going back to that Joint Strike Fighter, and the significant amount of money associated with that, there's actually, it would have been a disservice to the taxpayer to try and execute on that plan that you set in 2009. Besides the delays that have been in the program, I think the decisions that have been made recently about when is the right time to buy the first large tranche of aircraft is actually a very sensible one. So I think you need to give people the ability to make judgments along the way, and make some adjustments to that program. The other thing that we do see is that there will be a requirement for short notice acquisitions, and the ones that or if you like, acquisitions that are done in an accelerated way. The two I'd sort of cite is C-27, and I've seen a lot of characterisation of C-27 and indeed the Largs Bay, which we did last year, as examples of, well, Defence couldn't spend the money, so they looked for areas to soak up the money. And I think that's a bit disingenuous. When the decision was made to do C-27 and the early work that went on with that aircraft, what became clear was two things. One was the early work on the airlift study and other work really identified that you needed a fleet of about 6 aircraft. That was about the optimum fleet that you would have to provide sustainability and enough critical weight. What we found with experience with those increasing numbers was actually it was a remarkably capable aircraft, and that as you started to use it, you saw more uses that could be made of it, and in fact less use that you could of the C-130, and that you really needed to try and get that mix right between C-27, C-130 and C-17. So I think what you've seen is some sensible decisions made on the basis of experience, and also using some of that original work to say, really, 6 is where you should be going for a good airlift, strategic airlift fleet. Next one is Largs Bay. I think there's no denying that what occurred was that government and Defence realised that they had a shortfall in their capability in terms of amphibious lift. And then we had the situation where Largs Bay became available, which was a pretty rare event, as many of the mariners would know, to get virtually a near new amphibious ship, which, I mean, there's never enough amphibious ships in nations' fleets, to have a ship like that available. And I guess the litmus test here is if Largs Bay wasn't there, if Largs Bay was not won by Australia in that competitive bid, we would have been looking for another ship to fill that gap. I think, as an aside, what Largs Bay showed was in comparison to other nations, we're actually pretty good in terms of capability development group and in terms of the capability development process. The fact that you could actually develop a robust business case, take it to government in a very short time, and to develop a competitive bid, in fact a winning bid, was a terrific outcome. And in fact, some of the competing countries actually couldn't get their bid in time. So I think sometimes we do beat ourselves up unnecessarily when actually we do pretty well. I guess the other piece to this is that I think we need to be accepting of the fact that there are times when we will, on an opportunity basis, make some acquisitions in a reasonably accelerated way, and also the circumstances will change, and we've got to be agile enough to do that. So I think that we've done that. I think the other thing that is lost, though, is these accelerated acquisitions take up a disproportionate amount of energy to do. So the work to get the business cases to the same level that you would expect a normal acquisition requires a huge amount of work, and also takes people off the other projects just going along in the normal sequences of events. So it does come with an opportunity cost. But what we've realised is that is a perfectly reasonable expectation of government, that they can make these changes, and what we've got to do is make sure that we're able to adjust our resources to do that. But I think it is important to realise that other things get put back while we work on those, and the same applied, of course, in DMO and in the capability managers. Now turning to the second point, the key activities following this year's budget. The first priority was, for us, was in terms of the classified defence capability plan, was to make sure that having, in a reasonably short amount of time, to make those adjustments, is then to actually look in detail at the plan with the service headquarters and the acquisition agency, and just go through them all carefully to make sure that we are not having any capability gaps. So in other words, as we've moved some projects right 1 or 2 years, that won't have an impact in a couple of years' time in terms of plan withdrawal dates of existing capabilities. And I think that exercise demonstrates the way that these days you actually have to work very, very closely with the capability managers and the DMO in particular, in terms of making sure we've got it right, making sure we've also got the sustainment funding there, so that we are able to maintain that sort of capability. So that is, if you like, the first thing that we've had to do, and the expectation is that we will be able to present to government shortly a classified DCP for 2012. Now, some people have said to me, well, why do you want to have a classified DCP which has essentially got a life of 12 months? And really, it's a pretty practical one. You actually do need a classified DCP which actually demonstrates you have the money when we go forward this year to government with projects seeking approval, that you can show you've got money in the program to actually fund them. And certainly the expectation of Department of Finance and Treasury is they want to be able to see that proof. So that's the main driver, if you like, to ensure that we don't lose momentum for projects, and that we're able to keep going. The reason why we're very conscious about not trying to have any gaps is really for 3 main reasons. First is we don't have a capability gap. We're conscious of the stop-start impact that industry has. We're also conscious that when you actually do start again and try and get momentum going, that leads to costs in terms of ramp-up costs, trying to get scarce expertise. We're very conscious that defence and industry rely on a lot of people who could be equally employed in the mining industry because of similar skill sets, and it's a very competitive market for skilled people. And so one of our approaches going forward to the white paper is we've postulated that, and a number of you who were at the press club the other day would have heard these categories, that really there's 3 categories for projects. There's projects which, irrespective of what happens in the white paper, it's a fair bet you're going to need that project. To replace key capabilities is probably a good example. And so the one I would cite is we need to replace HMAS Success. You know you're going to need a tanker. So irrespective of what happens in the white paper, you're going to need that project. The second category is projects which could shrink or enlarge in size based on how many radios you're going to buy, how much equipment you're going to buy. And so what the end state in the 2013 white paper, the end state of that ADF, you could imagine that some projects will be adjusted in terms of basically the size of them. And so one approach there is keep the project going, keep the momentum going with it, but from a contractual sense that you would have the ability to buy in batches, or you'd have an off-ramp for some of the later units and so on. So that's once again that approach. The final one is inevitably there will be projects which have a potential to distort the force structure. A potential one there would be, for example, the future submarine. Now, in the context of where we're at, though, it's actually worked out reasonably well for us. We've got government approval to do the scoping study work, and so what will eventually happen here is the work under Rowan Moffat's leadership will actually start to happen, and then some of that work will actually inform the white paper consideration. So I think in that respect there's few projects like that, and the one that really fits into this time frame is actually pretty well placed. We're conscious of doing that because we've seen in some previous white papers that the approval rate tends to flatline, and we're very conscious that we actually don't want to be in that space again. So at the moment we've got, in fact we were just talking about it, we've got people at all different levels within the group working with strategy group who've got the leadership for the white paper, with the vice chiefs area who've really got the lead in terms of the overall joint capability and how all the capabilities work together, with the service headquarters and with the three acquisition areas to actually sort of pull that together. The expertise that we bring in capability development group is a couple of things. One is the practicalities and the detailed knowledge about particular projects, and from the overall coordination and control of the classified defence capability plan, and it's that expertise which will be harnessed in terms of developing DCP 2013. I'd now just like to talk about, and this is a fairly short part, I guess, is just in terms of after the release of the 2013 white paper, what's going to happen? So I guess specifically from our perspective is two things. There will be a classified DCP, which our expectation is that will go hand in glove with the white paper, and then there will be a public version of that defence capability plan. We've actually got work underway for a public version of DCP 2012 at the moment, and we're hopeful that will come out very shortly, but that will be followed by, if you like, a probably a more detailed public DCP in 2013. Just finally, I just want to talk about a couple of myths, and some of these really I've seen a bit in some of the SEND inquiries and public submissions, and I've seen elsewhere. And I think that part of it really is, and I was talking to Peter Jennings beforehand, is part of it is, first off, I think it was a lack of awareness that what we do is of interest and we should be more forthcoming. But I put this down to really the fact of we really have to be much more open in terms of the process. We need to post much more of how we do business on the internet, and we should be much more engaged with people explaining how the process works. So on to my three myths I've picked. First myth is that the service chiefs as a capability manager don't get much of a say in new capabilities. This isn't true at all, and it's particularly not true following the Mortimer reviews and some of the changes made as part of the improvements in terms of the way we do the capability development process. Service chiefs play a major role, first off, in just what goes into the DCP, and play a major role in the development of the white paper. Once a project's actually in the white paper, one of the things we've instituted is a project initiation and review board. So that board is, and one of the things that we learned over time was, what we used to do was get the senior leadership of Defence involved at the very end in the Defence Capability Investment Committee and get them to sign off on a project. And a couple of them said, actually, we'd be much better off in terms of spending our time on, at the very beginning, setting out the requirement of what we actually need. And so that was, if you like, the genesis of actually having the Project Initiation Review Board. So today, the Service Chief for, if it's a maritime project, the Chief of Navy will come along, have the Head of Strategy, the CEO or one of the General Managers will come along and they'll sit with us and just go through what is the scope, what's the schedule, what are the key risks. We'll have the Chief Defence Scientist come along and talk about some of the technical risks and other risks associated with the project. The CEO or the General Manager will talk about, okay, so what is the acquisition strategy that we really need to approach with this? But the key bit in terms from the Service Chief's perspective is that they can actually put their marker down about what is essential, what's desirable, and the thing that we've seen in we've probably done nearly a dozen of these now, is that the Service Chiefs actually are fantastic at actually constraining ambition and saying, I'm prepared to trade this bit off, but these are the things that are essential to me. And in fact, in one of them, Defence Simulation, we had the Chief of Defence Force along, and many of you will be aware that General Hurley's particularly seized about the potential and the potential advantages for the ADF if we became more engaged in simulation, and we got pretty crystal clear guidance from him about what this defence simulation project should deliver. So that, if you like, is the first part. But just going through the process after that, the service headquarters, typically the 2 stars, will be engaged all along the way as we develop the business cases going forward to government. There's no min-sub that I do to the Minister about a project that doesn't get the endorsement from the Service Chief. There's no committee paper that goes forward that doesn't get the tick either from at the 2-star level or the Service Chief, and the Service Chief has to sign off on the final submission going forward. The second myth is just about a favourite subject of mine is contestability. I've seen a lot in the press and also in the recent inquiry just about the fact that there's no contestability in defence, and it was much better in the days of FDA, or Force Development Analysis Branch. I think before we sort of start debunking this myth, and I feel a bit like Mythbusters, is we need a short history lesson. So FDA was set up, really following the Tang reforms in around 1975, had a life to about 1999. And there were 2 main areas in FDA. One performed similar functions to the current Capability Investment Resources division, headed by Rebecca Skinner today. And they would develop agenda papers that would go with the submission and look at some options. And then you also had the Force Development Branch, would do a lot of the detailed analysis and use some work from defence scientists. Now, after '99, the remnants of that area went into the Vice Chief's area and then eventually into Capability Development Group, went to Strategy Group and also into DSTO. But it's important when you're talking about FDA and the role they played, you've got to look at it as part of a system. The system in those days was really quite different. The old system where you had proposals coming from the individual services, the manner in which those proposals and the detail of those proposals varied greatly, and so that was a big difference, if you like. Also, that they went not necessarily with an option, they then went forward with options put on by FDA, and when they went to government, and they only went to government once, they didn't have a 2-pass process. When they did go, they didn't have a schedule, they didn't have tender quality information. And so it's not surprising that there are problems with projects. It's not surprising that you ended up with projects like Super Sea Sprite and LPAs and so on, because all that detailed information of looking at a detailed schedule, actually getting tender quality prices and so on, all that happened after government approval. And really, when you compare the 2 things, our our first pass proposals going to government are in much greater level of fidelity than the old final acquisition cases going to government in the old days. Some would argue that we've probably got a bit too much detail in our first passes, and sometimes when we're engaging with Department of Finance and Treasury, I sometimes think that could be right, but I think we do benefit from that much greater level of scrutiny. And just turning, what do we do today? So there's contestability from CR division from initially, so FAS-CR actually attends a project initiation board, so from the very beginning there's contestability, but even up front in some of the early work we've done so far with this white paper, you know, there's advice to Secretary and CDF on some of that from CR division. So, and I think that's an area where we will grow and mature in time, that CR division will play even more role pre-projects actually going into the process of developing their business cases. But all along the way, they are developing addendums. Each committee, in fact, revolves around the critique and contestability that CR provide in terms of the addendum, and we actually try and drill down to all the issues that they've raised, address them in a sort of collegiate way. But I guess the other key aspect to it, so there's 5 opportunities in a structured sense where that contestability occurs, and then at the very end, CR then has the role of actually doing the CAB sub, preparing that CAB sub, taking the lead in terms of engagement with the central agencies to then get it across the lake. I think the benefit of that process is that they are part of that process. They actually do have a stake in the ground. It isn't a case of all care, no responsibility. So I think that's the benefit. But the other bit is that there is contestability from different areas. So the CODMO, for example, has to do an independent material implementation risk assessment. The Chief Defence Scientist has to do a technical risk assessment and provide a technical risk certificate. When we actually do trials and evaluation, and they're mandated for projects, then you have specific areas like the Australian Defence Trials and Evaluation area has to provide commentary. You need the facilities area and workforce and so on, all to provide their input and to provide assurance that the project is robust in those discrete areas. So I think that at the moment we're quite well placed to mature that sort of model to an even more robust level of contestability. But I think that what we have seen as these projects the later sort of projects have benefited immensely from actually having that level of independent analysis and contestability. And the thing I've seen in the last couple of years, I haven't seen any FAS-CIR who's been a shrinking violet. They've all been very happy to stand up and really confront projects about their inadequacies. And as painful as it is, it's clear that they've benefited from that process. The final myth I just want to talk about is, and I've read in a few articles, just talking about inter-service rivalry. And I think that part of it comes from people's experiences in years gone past. I'm not saying that inter-service rivalry doesn't exist, and it certainly does exist in the sporting field. And the service chiefs are, after those sort of games, fairly strident about the qualities of their sporting teams, and also they're very proud about their service and see very much the case that they are the advocate for their service and for their warfare domain. But having said that, my experience as one of the 3 purple 3 stars is that it is done in a very collegiate way, and I've certainly just witnessed that under the pressures of the budget adjustments, that the service chiefs have worked in a very professional and collegiate way, and they are very increasingly conscious of the capabilities each one brings. And I think it's a reflection, if you like, of where the ADF has gone. I mean, the ADF is probably one of the most joint defence forces in the world, and I think that's for a range of reasons. I think it's part of the size and the fact over recent times we've had to operate in the field around the world as a joint force, and so people have had a growing appreciation of of the skills and why services have particular cultures and the strengths that they bring. The fact that we do have the Defence Academy, so people join in a joint environment, that people typically do joint staff courses and typically do more than one, and the fact that there's very few areas at Russell, for example, which isn't joint. And so I think it's inevitable that that grows a culture which is much more appreciative of what each service brings. And it's certainly, what I've seen is that in the pressures of where budget is difficult and all that sort of thing, is people can still work in a professional and collegiate way. So I wouldn't put a lot of weight in some of the things you read about how Army and Navy and Air Force are fighting tooth and nail. I just haven't seen it. Certainly at the senior decision-making area where it counts. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the organisation. So I'd like to leave it there, but very happy to take any questions.